Sonic the Hedgehog, a series renowned for its fluctuating quality standard and ever-evolving speed-centric gameplay. This guy's had so many different incarnations and gameplay styles, and the difficulty scale is all over the place, with some games targeting a broader demographic and others asking way too much of the player. Today, we're looking at every main series Sonic the Hedgehog game and ranking them from misery to cakewalk. The first Sonic the Hedgehog game, when played on the original Genesis, is brutal. On your first playthroughs, there's so many unfair enemy placements, traps, and straight up bullshit to just eat away at your lives and force you to replay stages again and again. There's actually only 7 zones in the game, and 3 of them are really high speed and fun to romp through, but then there's Marble Zone, Labyrinth Zone, and Scrap Brain Zone, which get harder and harder for all the wrong reasons. Now, in Sonic Origins, having unlimited lives, a spin dash, and less glitches does make it a lot more manageable, but that's going to be a separate entry later on, and this game, as it was designed, is genuine misery. Sonic 2 took what the first game did and really refined it down to what worked best. Way more consistent level design, solid platforming, a fair and rewarding difficulty curve, and just a more seamless experience. It's definitely not an easy one though, especially compared to others in the series. Like the first game, there's no save states, so it has to be beaten in one go, and you'll still be losing plenty of lives, especially in the notorious Metropolis Zone, which does trigger some Sonic 1 flashbacks with the rage-inducing enemy placements, but I'd take this over Scrap Brain any day of the week. It's a really well-designed and difficult playthrough, so good challenge it is. Sonic CD feels quite a bit different from Sonic 2, but they're both hard in their own way. I feel like the levels are a bit easier here, being more focused on exploration than speed and reaction time, but the time travel mechanic makes things a lot more complicated, and it's not always for the better. Overall, it balances out to be about the same difficulty as Sonic 2, so I'm sticking it right there with it. Sonic 3 and Knuckles follows the CD approach of being more exploration-based, but this time the layouts are way less confusing and way more engaging. All the unique environments are really enticing to venture through, and there's a real natural progression in difficulty, but it doesn't pick up in the final act nearly as much as previous games. Also, there's a save system, the elemental shields are really freaking useful, there's plenty of branching paths and easier routes, and Super Sonic can be obtained really early on to make the game even easier. Now, it is a good bit longer than the previous games, and it still has its fair share of tough platforming and even a couple tricky bosses, so I'll give it credit as a middle-of-the-pack difficulty. Sonic 3D Blast is probably the slowest Sonic game, and there's not even much platforming to compensate for that. Instead, you just walk around and look for flickies, and the only real challenge comes from the awkward way Sonic controls and the weird isometric perspective that you'd never quite get the hang of. Without the clunkiness, it'd be a cakewalk, but as it is, it's still kinda easy. Sonic Adventure is such a stellar first attempt at a true 3D Sonic game. His classic moveset translates over great, the new homing attack makes enemy slaughter with the Z-axis way more manageable, and the level designs feel more like sandboxes to explore Sonic's mechanics with. It's great. That said, I don't remember a single Sonic stage that really tripped me up. The only time I died was in that Egg Viper fight, and that's because I thought it was over before it actually was. But that's not to mention the 5 other gameplay styles and story modes, which are just as easy. Most of them take like an hour, and the ones that still don't pick up the challenge at all. Hell, even the perfect chaos fight in the last story is all bark no bite. The only thing that makes this game hard is the dated camera. It does get in the way at times and make things feel a bit jank, but it's not as bad as it's often made out to be, and doesn't make a case for anything higher than a kinda easy tier. Adventure 2 definitely picks up the difficulty compared to the original. Now, there's only 3 gameplay styles, so having less clutter and there being more opportunity to master these styles allowed the developers to challenge you more and more, and the latter half of this game completely demonstrates that. It gets hard. Meteor Herd's vast and confusing layout makes treasure hunting a nightmare. Crazy Gadget and Final Rush up the stakes a ton with more enemies, death pits, and precise platforming, and the last story implementing all 6 characters into one continuous gauntlet of a stage was awesome. Doesn't quite reach that classic caliber of difficulty, but it certainly has its moments. The entire Sonic Advance trilogy is pretty consistent in terms of challenging the player. Everything's very fair, it controls well, each one takes like an hour or 2 to beat, and there's save states with plenty of extra lives, so it's very forgiving and really doesn't pose much challenge at all. Also, having multiple playable characters lets you play through the game with whatever moveset you like the most, which can make it even easier. It has some quality platforming here and there, and Advance 3 especially feels a bit more complex, but it can't go higher than kinda easy, and that's being generous. Sonic Heroes shakes up the formula a ton, and introduces a new team mechanic that has players switching between the speed, flight, and power archetypes to overcome all kinds of obstacles. The level designs play into this really well, but there's also a lot, and I mean a lot, of bullshit. For starters, where previous games have optimal routes that really don't halt your flow at all, this one introduces mandatory enemy waves that force you to slowly and tediously beat up a bunch of robots with health bars. Combat is not fun, and even a lot of the speed is moved on rail, which would normally be alright, but the rail grinding does not work as it's supposed to, and leads to many unfair and frustrating deaths. And to make that worse, some of these levels take upwards of 15 minutes. Dying to janky controls after sinking that much time into a stage is infuriating. Even still, just the Team Sonic playthrough is a pretty moderate challenge, but to actually beat the game and fight Metal Madness, you have to complete the other 3 storylines, and they recycle all the same stages and feature the same core gameplay, which gets repetitive as f***. That's why I've never beaten this game. Honestly, it wears you thin. It has promise and fun moments, but completing it is miserable. Shadow the Hedgehog is an interesting case. The gameplay is somewhat similar to the adventure games, but then he's got a gun and commits a bunch of homicides, so maybe not? Each level gives Shadow options. He can choose to help the heroes, help Eggman, or help Black Doom. So depending on which way you want to go, it can be an easier playthrough or be loaded with rage bait. Some objectives are jank and have these crazy difficulty spikes, but most routes are generally pretty straightforward and not too bad. Now, if you're going for the true ending and 100% completion, you're in for an awful time, because you have to play through the same game like a dozen times, accepting different missions and whatnot, and that's absolutely brutal. But to reach the credits, it's not too bad. I like has its moments for this one. A single playthrough can be pretty light, but trying to do everything makes it absolute hell. This game introduces the boost style, and that does make a lot of future games a good bit easier, but in its debut, it's incorporated really well in a way that still challenges the player. There's a very gradual difficulty curve throughout the game, with the final act being fairly challenging, and the boss is actually posing a serious threat. It's definitely a step up from the Advanced trilogy. I think it has its moments. I've made my thoughts on Sonic 06 pretty clear over the years. I don't think it's all that bad. I know it's unpolished and the story's a bit weird, but the level designs are great and the gameplay has so much potential, with Project 06 being clear evidence of that. Also, would you guys want to see me do a video on that? Let me know down below. But in terms of difficulty, I think the game is pretty balanced. I think there's a ton of glitches that make certain segments unnecessarily hard, like the Mach Speed sections, climbing with Knuckles and Rouge, and every freaking vehicle segment, but I still don't think it's close to miserable. The fight against Silver, okay, a little miserable. The desert level with the giant billiard balls, okay, very miserable, but those are pretty cherry-picked, and I still have fun with this one overall. I'd say it has its moments of pain, but is mostly pretty moderate. Rush Adventure is pretty similar to its predecessor, but there's way less boosting gameplay and way more focus on story and gimmicky vehicle sections. It's a lot more tame than the original, and doesn't pick things up as much in the climax, but there's still some challenge, and it's not mindless. I like kinda easy here. Sonic Unleashed is really a double-edged sword. The daytime stages that feature the boost style in 3D are masterfully crafted, lightning fast, and enjoyable as hell. They're not hallways like some later games, but they're still relatively easy for the series, and it's the nighttime stages that kick things up a notch, and not in a very good way. Slow and uninspired platforming that's constantly interrupted by enemy waves that feature lackluster hack-and-slash gameplay. It's a rough combo to work with, and on original hardware, they didn't run the best either, so it was a laggy and mundane experience. I wouldn't necessarily call it hard if it weren't for these two really big setbacks. First, if you thought Sonic Heroes had long levels, you might want to sit down, because some of these Werehog stages take like 20 minutes. 20 minutes for one level, and if you god forbid get a game over, you're starting all the way over again, buddy. The second big problem applies to the entire game. You don't just beat a level and move on to the next one like, you know, a normal game would. Instead, they have these paywalls for progression that require you to find a certain number of Sun and Moon medals, and this requires an insane amount of backtracking that makes a full playthrough kinda miserable. The Werehog levels are already slow, so keeping your eyes peeled for these isn't a problem, but the daytime stages are designed for you to fly through, and having to slow down to look for collectibles contradicts that entirely. Because of that, yes, a playthrough is incredibly straining and deserves to be in misery tier. Also, Eggman Land might be the hardest level in Sonic history, so that practically locks it there. The first episode of Sonic 4 plays things very safe. It feels like the new Super Mario Bros. Of the Sonic series, primarily made for a handheld device, brings the character back to their quote 2D roots, and is a very generic feeling platformer. The level designs are way easier than the classic games, and having the homing attack makes that even easier. I think we've got our first cakewalk tier with this one. Sonic Colors tries to be a more beginner-friendly Sonic game, especially because it was a Wii exclusive at the time of release, so they basically wanted to cash in on Mario fans. It's technically a 3D Sonic game, but almost all the platforming and, well, gameplay takes place in 2D, and it's not afraid to slow things down. The new Wisps make traversing levels a lot easier. They're gimmicky and either have sections designed for their specific use, or they help you bypass trickier chunks of level. It still offers some more difficult moments, they're few and far between, but it does keep it out of Cakewalk tier. Sonic Generations has the most polished gameplay and levels in the entire series. Everything's so refined and fun, and it really doesn't try to challenge you all that much. The classic levels may be a little boring, but they're not hard, and the modern stages are all really easy, with S ranks being attainable in just a couple runs. I'm not complaining though, it feels great and is satisfying as hell, but it's definitely kinda a cakewalk. When paired with Shadow Generations though, yeah, still a cakewalk. Compared to Sonic 4 Episode 1, the second part picks things up a little, but not much. The level design is much improved from the first game, and it actually feels like a decently substantial playthrough, so I'll say it's a step up and kinda easy. Sonic Lost World once again shakes up the Sonic formula and gives him his first ever run button. What the f*** were they thinking? Parkour, cylindrical levels, all cool ideas, but none of them were as prominent as they should have been, and like Colors, most of the game takes place in 2D, which is kind of a bummer too. That said though, it's a really clean playthrough, and it does actually offer a good amount of challenge late in the game. There's way harder platforming and parkour moments in both 2D and 3D, and the bosses go from mindlessly spamming your homing attack to actually needing some thoughtfulness and precision. I was surprised by the difficulty spike, but it felt very natural and wasn't abrupt or unfair. It's honestly a really good challenge. I haven't played Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, I won't lie, but I know there's a glitch with Knuckles that lets you infinite jump, and that breaks any potential challenge to make this an easy cakewalk. Mania is a true revival of classic Sonic. The gameplay feels like a faithful modern evolution, the level designs feel more like the classics than the actual classics, and the way it gradually challenges the player feels almost identical to Sonic 2, being very focused on memorization and skill. There's no stages nearly as hard as Metropolis here, but having way more consistently tough bosses certainly makes up for that, and secures it a spot in good challenge tier. Sonic forces me to play this fucking game. It's bad. The classic levels drag, the modern levels are straight lines, and the custom character is straight up boring. In terms of pure difficulty, it's a cakewalk, but trying to play it all the way through without falling asleep may pose more of a challenge. Still way easy. Sonic Origins ties all the classic Sonic games into one package, and takes them from incredibly challenging playthroughs to honestly pretty cake. It cleans up some of the BS and gives you unlimited lives, which were the biggest reasons why those original games were so damn hard to beat. And with these quality of life improvements, they're very manageable playthroughs overall. Sonic Frontiers is a pretty tricky one to place, because Sonic's moveset is more versatile than ever, the open world gameplay can be a lot more chill and easygoing, and the cyberspace levels are pretty straightforward in design, but some S ranks can be almost impossible, the bosses are some of the strongest in the series, and the late game especially picks up the difficulty. I think it all averages out to a pretty moderate Sonic game. Sonic Superstars was way better than I thought it was going to be, but that doesn't mean it's very hard. It may look like a classic Sonic game with a modern art style, but it feels pretty fundamentally different, with levels that are more linear and forgiving, and no real late game push in difficulty. Having a choice in who you play as also makes it a good bit easier. You can pick whichever character makes a given level more manageable, and that further waters it down. On the bright side though, the bosses are once again a strong suit, and the final one was one of the harder ones in the series, so that'll do just enough to lock it into kinda easy tier. And there you have it.